Hello everyone, and welcome to today's profound exploration of the Amitayurdhyana Sutra, known in Sanskrit as the Sukhavati Vyuha Sutra, the third and perhaps most beloved jewel in the Pure Land trilogy. Today we'll discover together how the simple practice of mindful recitation can transform ordinary moments into gateways to enlightenment, and how the power of calling upon Amitabha Buddha's name can bring profound peace and awakening into our daily lives. The Amitayurdhyana Sutra is unique among Buddhist texts because it was spoken spontaneously by the Buddha without anyone asking a question. This suggests that its message is so essential, so universally needed, that the Buddha felt compelled to share it, even without being prompted. It's a teaching that speaks directly to our most fundamental human needs for connection, meaning, and peace in the midst of life's inevitable challenges. What makes this sutra especially relevant for our contemporary world is its emphasis on practice that can be integrated seamlessly into daily life. Unlike meditation techniques that require special postures, quiet environments, or extended periods of time, the practice of mindful recitation can be done anywhere, anytime, by anyone, regardless of their circumstances or level of spiritual experience. The sutra begins with Buddha spontaneously addressing his disciple, Shariputra, one of his most intellectually gifted followers, known for his wisdom and analytical abilities. Buddha says, Shariputra, in the western direction from here, passing through countless Buddha lands, there is a world called ultimate bliss. In this land, there is a Buddha named Amitabha, who is teaching the Dharma right now. When we read this literally, Buddha is describing a specific geographical location in cosmic space, infinitely far to the west, where an enlightened being named Amitabha, meaning infinite light, presides over a realm of perfect happiness and spiritual opportunity. This isn't just a description of a distant place, but an invitation to understand that perfect conditions for spiritual development actually exist. This opening can be interpreted on multiple levels. Geographically, the western direction has symbolic significance in many traditions as the direction of completion and fulfillment, where the sun sets and the day reaches its natural conclusion. Psychologically, the Pure Land represents states of consciousness that are possible for every human being, conditions of inner peace and clarity that transcend ordinary limitations. The existentialist philosopher Gabriel Marcel wrote about hope as fundamentally different from optimism, describing it as openness to possibilities that transcend current limitations. Buddha's spontaneous description of the Pure Land represents this kind of hope, revealing possibilities that exist beyond what we can currently see or imagine. Carl Jung's concept of the collective unconscious includes what he called the archetype of the self, representing human potential for wholeness and integration. The Pure Land described by Buddha can be understood as a manifestation of this archetype, showing us what becomes possible when consciousness is fully developed and integrated. Contemporary positive psychology research has identified what researchers call post-traumatic growth, the capacity for people to develop greater wisdom, compassion, and life satisfaction as a result of working through major challenges. The Pure Land represents the ultimate expression of this human capacity for transformation and transcendence. For those of you who feel trapped by current circumstances or limited by past experiences, Buddha's spontaneous description of the Pure Land offers profound hope. It reminds us that perfect conditions for happiness and spiritual growth actually exist, not just as future possibilities, but as present realities that become accessible through proper practice and understanding. You don't have to accept that your current limitations are permanent, or that your highest aspirations are unrealistic. Buddha continues by describing the Pure Land in detail, explaining that beings born there experience no suffering, only happiness, and that their lives are filled with conditions that naturally support spiritual development. He describes how the ground is made of gold, the air is filled with the fragrance of celestial flowers, and beautiful music constantly plays, inspiring devotion and joy. The literal description presents an environment where every sensory experience supports rather than distracts from spiritual practice. Unlike our world, where we constantly encounter things that disturb our peace or tempt us away from our highest intentions, the Pure Land provides perfect conditions for maintaining focus on what truly matters. These descriptions can be understood as representing the transformation of perception that happens when consciousness is purified of negative mental states. When the mind is free from anger, greed, and confusion, even ordinary experiences reveal their inherent beauty and spiritual significance. The golden ground represents the precious nature of existence itself when seen with clear eyes. The environmental psychologist Roger Barker studied how physical environments shape behavior and well-being, finding that certain environmental features naturally promote positive emotional states and social cooperation. The Pure Land descriptions can be understood as presenting the optimal environment for human psychological and spiritual flourishing. Research on biophilia, our innate connection to natural beauty, shows that exposure to beautiful natural environments reliably improves mood, reduces stress, and enhances cognitive function. The sensory perfection described in the Pure Land activates these same natural healing and uplifting responses. Modern therapeutic environments, from healing gardens and hospitals to meditation retreat centers, attempt to create conditions similar to those described in the Pure Land, environments where every element supports healing, growth, and inner peace. In your daily life, you can begin to create your own version of these supportive conditions. This doesn't require major changes, but rather developing awareness of how different environments affect your mental state and gradually making choices that support your peace and spiritual aspirations. Even small changes, like adding beauty to your living space, choosing music that uplifts your spirit, or spending time in natural settings can help create conditions that support your highest development. Buddha then introduces the central practice of the sutra, explaining that beings are born in the Pure Land through faith, aspiration, and the practice of calling upon Amitabha Buddha's name. He says that even reciting the name for just one day, or even just 10 times with sincere concentration, is sufficient to ensure birth in the Pure Land. Literally, this teaching promises that a very simple practice, accessible to anyone regardless of their education, circumstances, or spiritual experience, can lead to the highest spiritual achievement. The name Amitabha represents infinite light and infinite life, the fundamental qualities of enlightened consciousness. The practice of calling upon Amitabha's name can be understood as a form of mantra meditation, using repetitive sacred sounds to focus and purify the mind. Modern neuroscience has shown that repetitive practices like this can induce states of deep relaxation, reduce anxiety, and promote feelings of well-being and connection. The practice also functions as a form of mindfulness meditation, using the recitation to anchor attention in the present moment rather than being caught up in past regrets or future anxieties. Each repetition becomes an opportunity to return to clarity and peace. The psychologist Herbert Benson's research on the relaxation response showed that simple, repetitive practices, whether religious or secular, can reliably induce beneficial physiological changes, including reduced blood pressure, decreased stress hormones, and improved immune function. The practice of reciting Amitabha's name activates these same healing responses. Contemporary research on prayer and contemplative practice has found that regular recitation practices can significantly improve emotional regulation, increase feelings of social connection, and enhance overall life satisfaction. These benefits occur regardless of specific religious beliefs. The beautiful simplicity of this practice makes it accessible to you regardless of your current life circumstances. Whether you're dealing with stress at work, caring for family members, or facing health challenges, you can practice mindful recitation throughout your day. The practice becomes a way of maintaining spiritual connection and inner peace, even in the midst of ordinary activities and responsibilities. Buddha explains that when people hear about this practice, they should accept it with faith and aspiration, understanding that such a simple path to liberation is possible because of Amitabha Buddha's immense compassion and the power of his original vows. This faith is not blind belief, but confident trust based on understanding the principles involved. The literal meaning emphasizes that this practice works not through our own power alone, but through connecting with sources of wisdom and compassion that transcend our individual limitations. This represents a fundamental shift from relying solely on personal effort to opening ourselves to receive help from beyond our current capacity. This teaching can be interpreted as addressing the universal human need for support and connection in our spiritual development. While individual effort is important, complete spiritual fulfillment often requires acknowledging our limitations and opening ourselves to sources of wisdom and love that come from beyond the ego. The philosopher Emmanuel Levinas wrote about the ethical importance of acknowledging our dependence on others and our responsibility to respond to calls for help. The practice of calling upon Amitabha represents both sides of this relationship, recognizing our need for help, while also expressing our willingness to receive it. Carl Rogers, research on therapeutic relationships showed that healing happens most effectively when clients feel genuinely accepted and supported unconditionally. The faith in Amitabha's compassion represents this same quality of unconditional acceptance applied to spiritual development. Attachment theory in psychology demonstrates how secure relationships in early life create the foundation for resilience and growth throughout life. Faith in Amitabha's support can provide this same sense of secure attachment for spiritual development, creating confidence that we're ultimately held and supported in our growth. This teaching offers profound relief from the pressure of trying to achieve spiritual development through personal effort alone. While your sincere intention and regular practice are important, you don't have to carry the entire burden of transformation by yourself. By opening your heart to receive support from sources of wisdom and compassion beyond your current understanding, you access resources that can accomplish what individual effort alone cannot achieve. Buddha then addresses potential doubts about the practice, explaining that when he taught about the Pure Land and the practice of recitation, countless Buddhas throughout the universe simultaneously taught the same message, confirming its truth and effectiveness. This cosmic endorsement emphasizes the universal validity of these teachings. Literally, this passage describes a moment when all enlightened beings throughout infinite space simultaneously taught the same message, creating what we might call a cosmic consensus about the truth and importance of these teachings. This unprecedented agreement emphasizes the fundamental importance of what's being shared. This universal confirmation can be understood as representing the principle that genuine spiritual truths are recognized across different traditions and cultures. While the specific forms of practice may vary, the underlying principles of compassion, wisdom, and the possibility of transcendence appear consistently throughout human spiritual experience. The anthropologist Joseph Campbell identified what he called the monomyth, recognizing similar spiritual themes and practices across cultures throughout history. The Universal Buddha confirmation represents this same recognition of fundamental spiritual truths that transcend cultural boundaries. Contemporary research on contemplative practices across different religious traditions has found remarkably similar benefits and outcomes, regardless of the specific theological framework. This suggests that certain spiritual practices connect with universal human capacities for growth and transcendence. The psychologist William James studied religious experience across cultures and found consistent patterns in how people describe encounters with transcendent reality. The Universal Buddha confirmation represents the same kind of cross-cultural validation of fundamental spiritual insights. When you encounter doubts about your spiritual practice or wonder whether your efforts are worthwhile, remember that the principles underlying genuine spiritual development are supported by wisdom traditions throughout history and across cultures. The specific form your practice takes is less important than your sincere commitment to growth and your willingness to remain open to possibilities beyond your current understanding. The sutra then describes how beings in the Pure Land spend their time, explaining that they listen to beautiful teachings, enjoy perfect fellowship with other spiritual practitioners, and naturally progress toward full enlightenment without effort or struggle. Their days are filled with activities that naturally support their spiritual development. Literally, this describes a life where every activity contributes to spiritual growth rather than creating distraction or obstacles. Learning happens naturally through beautiful experiences rather than through difficult study, and spiritual community provides constant support and inspiration rather than competition or conflict. This description can be understood as representing what becomes possible when our lives are organized around spiritual values rather than ego gratification or material accumulation. When our priorities are clear and our environment supports our highest aspirations, spiritual development happens naturally and joyfully. The educator John Dewey emphasized learning through experience and the importance of creating educational environments where learning happens naturally through engagement with meaningful activities. The Pure Land represents the perfect application of these educational principles to spiritual development. Research on optimal learning environments shows that people learn best when they feel safe, supported, and engaged with meaningful challenges that match their current capacity for growth. The Pure Land provides exactly these conditions for spiritual learning. Studies of intentional communities and spiritual retreat centers show that environments designed around shared spiritual values can indeed create conditions where personal growth and positive relationships flourish more easily than in ordinary social settings. You can begin creating aspects of this ideal spiritual environment in your current life by choosing activities that naturally support your spiritual development, seeking out community with others who share your spiritual aspirations, and gradually organizing your daily routine around what truly matters to you rather than external pressures or social expectations. Buddha explains that the practice of reciting Amitabha's name is especially suitable for our current era, which he describes as a time when spiritual practice is generally more difficult due to increased distractions, shorter attention spans, and greater emphasis on material concerns rather than spiritual development. The literal teaching recognizes that different historical periods present different challenges and opportunities for spiritual practice, and that the most effective practices must be adapted to current conditions rather than simply replicating what worked in different circumstances. This teaching can be interpreted as showing remarkable prescience about contemporary challenges. Our current era is indeed characterized by unprecedented levels of distraction, information overload, and pressure to focus on material success rather than inner development. The media theorist Neil Postman wrote about how technologies shape consciousness and behavior in ways we often don't recognize. Buddha's teaching about different eras requiring different spiritual approaches anticipates similar insights about how environmental factors affect our capacity for spiritual practice. Contemporary research on attention and meditation has found that modern urban environments create levels of cognitive load and distraction that can make traditional meditation practices more difficult for many people. Simple, repetitive practices like name recitation are often more accessible for contemporary practitioners. Psychologist Sherry Turkle's research on technology and attention has documented how digital environments can fragment attention and make sustained contemplative practice more challenging. The simplicity of name recitation makes it adaptable to contemporary attention patterns. Rather than feeling discouraged that spiritual practice seems more difficult in contemporary life, you can appreciate teachings specifically designed for current conditions. The practice of mindful recitation works with, rather than against, contemporary attention patterns, providing a way to maintain spiritual connection even in busy, distracting environments. The sutra emphasizes that the practice of reciting Amitabha's name should be done with mindfulness and sincerity rather than as mere mechanical repetition. Each recitation should be a genuine expression of faith, gratitude, and aspiration for spiritual development. Literally, this instruction distinguishes between mindful practice and absent-minded repetition, emphasizing that the quality of attention and intention brought to the practice is more important than the quantity of repetitions performed. This teaching addresses a common misunderstanding about repetitive spiritual practices, clarifying that effectiveness comes from engaged awareness rather than from accumulating large numbers of repetitions. Each moment of sincere practice is more valuable than hours of distracted repetition. The mindfulness meditation teacher Jon Kabat-Zinn emphasizes the importance of bringing what he calls beginner's mind to contemplative practice, approaching each moment with fresh attention rather than going through familiar motions automatically. Research on deliberate practice and skill development shows that focused, intentional practice produces much better results than unfocused repetition, even when the total time invested is less. This principle applies equally to spiritual practice. Cognitive psychology research on attention and memory shows that meaningful engagement with material creates much stronger learning and retention than passive repetition. Mindful recitation creates the conditions for genuine spiritual transformation rather than mere habit formation. In your own practice, focus on quality rather than quantity. A few moments of genuinely mindful recitation, where you're fully present and engaged with the practice, will be more beneficial than extended periods of distracted repetition. Let each recitation be a fresh moment of connection with your spiritual aspirations, rather than mechanical habit. Buddha describes how practitioners of this path will be protected and supported by Buddhas and Bodhisattvas throughout their spiritual journey, never facing obstacles they cannot overcome and always receiving the guidance they need for continued development. The literal meaning promises constant spiritual protection and guidance for sincere practitioners, ensuring that they will never be abandoned or left to struggle alone with challenges beyond their capacity to handle. This promise can be understood as describing the natural support that becomes available when we align ourselves with compassionate wisdom. When our intentions are genuinely focused on spiritual development and service to others, we often find that unexpected help and guidance appear exactly when needed. Carl Jung wrote about what he called synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that seem to provide guidance and support for psychological and spiritual development. The protection described in this teaching often manifests through such synchronistic occurrences. Social psychology research on altruism and cooperation shows that people who consistently act with compassion and generosity tend to receive more help and support from others, creating positive feedback loops that enhance their capacity to continue helping. Studies of resilience and post-traumatic growth have found that people with strong spiritual beliefs and practices tend to cope better with adversity and often emerge from challenges with increased wisdom and compassion. When you're facing difficulties in your spiritual practice or life challenges that seem overwhelming, remember that sincere commitment to spiritual development tends to attract support and guidance, often from unexpected sources. This doesn't mean you'll never face challenges, but that you'll never face them without the resources needed to grow from the experience. The sutra explains that at the moment of death, practitioners will see Amitabha Buddha clearly, along with many bodhisattvas, coming to guide them peacefully to the Pure Land. This vision brings complete peace and confidence, eliminating fear and confusion that often accompany the dying process. Literally, this teaching promises that death becomes a moment of joyful reunion rather than fearful separation, with enlightened beings appearing to provide guidance and support during the transition from one state of existence to another. This promise can be understood psychologically as describing the peace that comes from having lived a spiritually meaningful life. When we've regularly practiced connecting with transcendent wisdom and compassion, facing death becomes less frightening because we've already experienced states of consciousness that transcend ordinary limitations. The physician Elizabeth Kubler-Ross documented numerous accounts of dying patients who experienced visions of deceased loved ones or spiritual beings that brought profound peace and comfort. These experiences often transformed the dying process from one of fear to one of peaceful acceptance. Near-death experience research has consistently found that people who have spiritual practices or beliefs report more positive experiences during clinical death, often including encounters with beings of light that provide guidance and comfort. Hospice workers and anatologists have observed that people who maintain regular spiritual practices often experience more peaceful deaths, with less anxiety and more acceptance of the transition they're facing. This teaching offers liberation from one of humanity's deepest fears. Regular practice of mindful recitation helps prepare you not only for a peaceful death, but for a meaningful life, knowing that your spiritual development continues beyond current limitations, and that you're ultimately supported by infinite wisdom and compassion. Buddha concludes the sutra by stating that he has described the Pure Land and taught the practice of name recitation because he wants all beings to aspire to birth there, recognizing this as the most direct path to liberation suitable for most people in most circumstances. This conclusion emphasizes that the teaching is given out of pure compassion, not to promote any particular tradition, but to provide the most accessible and effective method for spiritual development available to human beings. Buddha's motivation can be understood as representing the natural impulse of wisdom and compassion to share what's most helpful. When we truly understand what brings peace and fulfillment, we naturally want to share that understanding with others who are struggling. The philosopher Emmanuel Levinas wrote about the ethical responsibility we have to respond to others' suffering and to share whatever resources we have that might help. Buddha's teaching of this practice represents the same ethical impulse to share what's most beneficial. Research on helping behavior and altruism shows that people who have found effective solutions to life challenges naturally tend to share those solutions with others who are facing similar difficulties. Studies of therapeutic effectiveness consistently show that simple, accessible interventions that can be practiced consistently over time often produce better long-term results than complex therapies that are difficult to maintain. Buddha's recommendation of this practice to all beings reflects his recognition that while spiritual development takes many forms, some approaches are more universally accessible and effective than others. You don't need to feel that you must master complex philosophical systems or difficult meditation techniques to achieve genuine spiritual fulfillment. The sutra ends with all the disciples and celestial beings expressing joy and gratitude for these teachings, promising to practice them faithfully and share them with others who might benefit from this simple yet profound path to awakening. This universal positive response suggests that the teaching addresses fundamental human needs and aspirations that transcend cultural and historical boundaries. The joy expressed by the audience reflects recognition that they've received something genuinely precious and transformative. The commitment to practice and share these teachings represents the natural response when we encounter wisdom that genuinely helps us. Effective spiritual practices tend to inspire both personal commitment and desire to help others access similar benefits. Research on positive psychology and well-being shows that people who discover practices that significantly improve their life satisfaction naturally want to share those practices with family and friends. Studies of social contagion and health behaviors demonstrate that positive practices tend to spread through social networks when people witness their beneficial effects in others' lives. The universal positive response described in the sutra reflects the natural human tendency to want to share discoveries that bring genuine happiness and peace. As we come to the end of our exploration today, let's reflect on what the Amitayurdhyana Sutra offers us as people seeking meaning and peace in contemporary life. This ancient text presents a remarkably simple yet profound approach to spiritual development that can be integrated seamlessly into modern living. The practice of mindful recitation offers several unique advantages for contemporary practitioners. Unlike meditation techniques that require special postures, quiet environments, or extended periods of time, this practice can be done anywhere, anytime, while engaged in ordinary activities. Whether you're commuting to work, doing household chores, or lying in bed at night, you can practice connecting with sources of wisdom and compassion that transcend your current limitations. The simplicity of the practice makes it accessible to people regardless of their educational background, religious upbringing, or current life circumstances. You don't need to master complex philosophical concepts or achieve particular states of consciousness to begin benefiting from this approach to spiritual development. Perhaps most importantly, this practice addresses the fundamental human need for connection and support in our spiritual journey. While individual effort and self-reliance are important, complete spiritual fulfillment often requires acknowledging our limitations and opening ourselves to receive help from sources of wisdom and compassion beyond our current capacity. The practice of calling upon Amitabha's name represents a form of prayer that doesn't require belief in any particular theology. Whether you understand Amitabha as a historical figure, an archetypal representation of enlightened consciousness, or simply a focal point for meditation, the practice can be equally effective. What matters is the sincerity of your intention and the regularity of your practice. Regular practice of mindful recitation can serve multiple functions in daily life. It can be a form of stress relief, helping you return to calm and clarity when feeling overwhelmed. It can be a way of maintaining spiritual connection throughout busy days filled with mundane responsibilities. It can be a preparation for facing life's major challenges, including illness, loss, and death, with greater equanimity and wisdom. The practice also functions as a form of gratitude meditation, each recitation becoming an expression of appreciation for the sources of beauty, wisdom, and compassion that sustain us. This attitude of gratitude has been shown by research to significantly improve mental health, relationships, and overall life satisfaction. For those interested in developing this practice, the traditional approach is to begin with short periods of mindful recitation, perhaps 5 or 10 minutes daily, gradually extending the practice as it becomes more natural and beneficial. The key is consistency rather than duration, making the practice a regular part of your daily routine, rather than something you do occasionally when you remember. The practice can be done silently or aloud, whichever feels more natural and appropriate for your circumstances. Some practitioners find that coordinating the recitation with their breathing rhythm helps maintain focus and creates a meditative quality. Others prefer to let the recitation flow naturally without forcing any particular rhythm. Many practitioners discover that the practice gradually transforms their overall mental attitude, helping them become more patient, compassionate, and peaceful in their daily interactions. This happens not through forcing yourself to change, but through regularly connecting with qualities of wisdom and compassion that naturally influence your thoughts and behavior, The Pure Land described in this sutra can be understood as both a future destination and a present possibility. Every time you choose to focus on what's beautiful and meaningful rather than what's frustrating or disappointing, every time you respond to difficulties with patience rather than anger, every time you treat others with kindness rather than judgment, you're creating and entering your own pure land. The ultimate goal of this practice is not escape from ordinary life, but transformation of how you experience and engage with daily circumstances. Regular connection with sources of wisdom and compassion gradually changes your perspective, helping you see the inherent beauty and spiritual significance that exists within ordinary experiences. As you go forward from today, I encourage you to experiment with incorporating mindful recitation into your daily routine. You might begin by simply saying Amitabha Buddha, or Infinite Light and Life, quietly to yourself during transition moments throughout your day, such as when walking from one place to another or waiting in line. Notice how this simple practice affects your mental state and overall sense of well-being. Pay attention to whether you feel more connected to sources of wisdom and compassion, more peaceful in challenging situations, or more appreciative of the beauty and goodness that already exists in your life. Remember that the effectiveness of this practice doesn't depend on your current level of faith or spiritual understanding. What matters is your willingness to experiment with connecting regularly to something greater than your individual concerns and limitations. Even if you begin with skepticism, sincere practice often gradually develops into genuine appreciation and trust. The name Amitabha means infinite light and infinite life. This light represents the illuminating power of wisdom that helps us see through confusion and fear to the truth of our situation. This life represents the vitality of compassion that never gives up on any being and never stops working for the welfare of all. Both this light and this life are not foreign to you, but represent the deepest potentials within your own consciousness. May the wisdom we've shared today become a source of lasting peace and connection in your daily life. May you discover through regular practice that you are never truly alone, that sources of wisdom and compassion are always available when you call upon them with sincerity. May the simple practice of mindful recitation help you transform ordinary moments into opportunities for spiritual growth and inner peace. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of one of Buddhism's most beloved and accessible teachings. The fact that this practice has brought comfort and awakening to countless people across cultures and centuries reminds us that the human capacity for transcendence and spiritual connection is both universal and eternally renewable. May these ancient wisdoms guide you toward the peace and fulfillment that are your natural inheritance.